Hello again, this is Pastor Brian Anderson from the Bridge Church, and I want to continue in our How to Study the Bible series. We talked about giving an example of Psalm 1 and how you might approach that psalm in terms of outlining it. I hope that was helpful. I want to continue with a couple of other passages on this video. The first one is 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13, all the way through 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7. And as we were talking about observation recently, I told you it can be very helpful if you will notice repeated words or phrases. Like when I'm reading through my Bible, what I'll do is I'll circle words that keep repeating and draw lines to connect them so I see the connection of those words to the passage. And if you do that, as you're reading 1 Peter 2:13 all the way through chapter 3, verse 7, you're going to notice 3 times that the word submit or submissive occurs. The first one is in 1 Peter 2:13. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. There's our first instance. The next one is a few verses later, down in verse 18. Servants, be submissive to your masters with all respect. And then there's a lengthy unpacking of what that entails from verse 18 all the way through verse 25. And then in chapter 3, verse 1, there's a third one. In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives. Okay, so 3 times we are introduced to this idea of an area of life where we need to be submissive. We have citizens being submissive of governing authorities. Then we have servants told to be submissive to their masters. And then we have wives that are told that they must be submissive to their husbands. So interestingly, the word submit or submissive occurs at the beginning of 3 paragraphs right in a row. We have the paragraph from 1 Peter 2:13 to 17, the very first line of that paragraph, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution. And then we have the next paragraph in 1 Peter 2:18 to 25, right at the beginning of it, it says, servants, be submissive to your masters. And then we have a third paragraph in chapter 3, verses 1 to 7. Right at the beginning of it, it says, in the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands. So as you're outlining this section, your title would have to do something with being submissive. I came up with this, very simple and generic, but anyway, it's a title I think that encapsulates all of this, submission in the Christian life. And then you could break it down into the 3 areas that Peter breaks it down into. Number 1, the duty of citizens, 1 Peter 2:13 to 17. Number 2, the duty of servants, 1 Peter 2:18 to 25. Number 3, the duty of wives, 1 Peter 3:1 to 7. So there's another example for you. Hope that's helpful. I wanted to give you one more today, and this is from Luke chapter 15. Now, Luke 15 is where we get the famous parable of the prodigal son. But what I want you to see in Luke 15 is actually verse 3 that starts off by saying, so he told them this parable, saying. He doesn't say, so he told them these parables. There's actually 3 different parts here. We have the story of the lost sheep, and then the story of the lost coin, and then the story of the lost son. But Luke just says he told them this parable. Evidently, Luke chapter 15 is one big, long, extended parable with 3 parts. And so in part 1, that's verses 3 to 7 of Luke 15, we have the joy of finding the lost sheep. And then the second one is Luke chapter 15, verses 8 to 10. We have the joy of finding the lost coin. And then part 3, verses 11 to 32, we have the joy of finding the lost son. Now, in every case, there's something that has been lost. In every case, that thing, whatever it was found. And in each case, joy is the result that flows from finding that lost thing. Notice also the progression. And the first one of finding the lost sheep, there's one lost sheep out of 100. In the second part, we have one lost coin out of 10. So we've gone from 1% to 10%. And then the third one is one lost son out of 2. Now we're down to 50%. So Jesus is very deliberately showing a progression in these various parts of the lost thing being found and joy resulting. And before we can really understand the chapter, we need to go back to the beginning and see the reason why Jesus gave the parable to begin with. So that's in verses 1 to 3. Now all the tax collectors and the sinners were coming near him to listen to him. Both the Pharisees and the scribes began to grumble, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable, saying. So what's the reason? The reason was because the Pharisees and scribes were grumbling when these sinners came to eat with Jesus, and Jesus, instead of turning them away, was receiving them. They were lost and they were being found by Christ. And instead of grumbling about that situation, Jesus wasn't grumbling. Jesus was thrilled. He was happy. He was joyful when that was taking place. So that helps us to understand a little bit of why Jesus would even go to the trouble of telling this particular parable. He's addressing it to the Pharisees and the scribes. He wants to correct their bad attitude with the truth of how heaven responds when anybody repents, when anyone is found. So that also, I think, will help us to know what's going on when we get down here to the elder brother in verses 25 to 32. Now, that's interesting. We don't have any corresponding part to the elder brother in the first two situations, the lost sheep and then the lost coin. This is a new addition in the final part of the lost son who is found. There's a lengthy treatment of this elder brother. Well, the elder brother grumbles because the father throws a big party for the prodigal when he comes home. Do you see that the elder brother is simply a representation of these Pharisees and scribes that were grumbling when Jesus received sinners and ate with them? That's his whole point here. He's trying to help these Pharisees and scribes understand that they ought to be rejoicing and not grumbling over all of this. So, Luke 15, how would we outline this chapter? Well, let me give you my attempt this morning as I was thinking this through. I would give the title something like Joy Over Finding the Lost. And then number 1, Joy Over Finding the Lost Sheep. That would be verses 3 to 7. Number 2, Joy Over Finding the Lost Coin. That's verses 8 to 10. And then Joy Over Finding the Lost Son. And that would be verses 11 to 32. So I hope just going through this exercise helps you and wets your whistle, your spiritual whistle, to try to get in and dig into the scriptures and come up with an outline yourself. I think you're going to find that the Lord will meet with you and give you joy as you pore over the scriptures and seek to understand them for yourself. May God bless you as you do that.